Okay, so here we are for another travelling conversation. Um, this one is really a bit about the aftermath of our last chat. I was quite tired and drained after it because, as well as the work of making the video, we were doing some work on, I guess, my personality, and the personality, wasn't very comfortable with that, I guess.
When we really engage with these topics and when you're open to it, something different happens as an energetic change. It's because we're not talking from, everyday life. We meet this person, we're this person, they're that person. We're talking about things beyond that level. So there's a different kind of vibration to it. And when you go to that vibration, especially when you're not used to it has an effect on you and on the body mind. This is why people go to what they call satsang and sit with teachers or people who are awake, because that energy is transmitted. It's a transmission, really, and in a way, this is a kind of version of that. But we're using the mind and words and concepts and talks. But of course, that can be done actually in silence if the viewer is open and ready. But we're actually using discussion to do that. So I would say that what happens is that you engaged in a different way with me when we talked about those issues, and because there was enough openness in you, there's a shift in you, because perhaps you're going to a place that you're not familiar with, and that does something to the body. Someone I know well, after having read the book, actually would actually go into a kind of swoon. It's a bit like in the strongest form, you're kind of knocked back, you're knocked out of your normal way of thinking and living. And the concepts have somehow got through and hit something on a deeper level that is beyond personality. So I think what we're talking about is the words taking you beyond your normal level of engagement, which is personality, to something beyond it. And the tiredness was actually a kind of expression of that.
But why would going to that level make me tired?
You might think it would energize you. What I would say is that it's like you're going to new territory and it's like you're not acclimatized to it. And that's what's tiring. It's a bit like going up Everest and the air's thinner. I mean, the air's not thinner, but the body's kind of acclimatize to that level. And people who live high in the Himalayas do that. Their bodies adapt to the lower level of oxygen and they can function normally, in fact, well. One has to adapt to that level and what it means in the body mind, how to live with that level.
So why would that being at that level be so tiring?
Well, I would say it's tiring temporarily, because when you first climb up Everest, you're absolutely exhausted because everything is new. But when one acclimatizes, you're not tired. In fact, you probably get a load more energy from it because there's more sun and,
less personality draining the energy, I guess, from what you've said before.
Exactly. You're kind of, you're within that, you're beyond the reach of that personality, and it's the personality, it's engagement with the personality that is the tiring bit. That's the one that expends energy constantly on useless things that are not in any way enriching your life. It's just draining you of energy. You look like you just got something then. What was that?
I was just remembering something that you had said to me about how I speak. That my speaking is almost just like can be like a tap that's left running. It's just a waste of energy. I'm also aware of the waste of energy that my personality is responsible for worrying about things that don't happen or might happen and never do. So it was really just imagining how much more energized I would be if I didn't speak as much.
Yeah, sometimes before we engage in a session, you sit for 10 minutes and you know how different you feel afterwards. I mean, it's a bit like you're leaving all these taps running in your daily life, and when you sit for 10 minutes, you're turning the taps off, and that all that energy is not being wasted, and you're it's kind of available to you, and your presence is greater because it's not being expended on unnecessary things.
Last time we met and I had a few minutes, I just wondered what my life would be like if I did that 3 times a day.
You could do that, and
it will become a practice, and I'll be...
so many things involved in this. If you're constantly having to work at turning off taps, and it becomes a kind of... You're not really in a natural state, you're kind of trying to reclaim what you've lost constantly, and that's what a practice is for. That's all fine because it has a beneficial effect in your life. But I'm actually talking about something different, where those things aren't continually occurring in a kind of, part of the structure of what makes Matthew what your life is about. So the machinery of that is kind of disengaged.
Right.
Because it becomes irrelevant. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because it's an interesting reflection on what practice is. And what I'm talking about is not about you keep meditating and then you keep some level of calm. I'm talking about a stillness that is actually your natural state and how one finds that. So the practice becomes...
irrelevant.
Yeah. I mean, if you are already free, you don't practice to be free. I just want to pick up with something, a subject we mentioned earlier when I talked about transmission in satsangs. Now, I many years ago, I went to see, Krishnamurti speak. I wasn't, a massive, follower of Krishnamurti. Of course, I read him like most people do on the path, but I always found him quite difficult and dry. So I went to see him out of interest, and she sat in the front row, I seem to remember, at his school, and I think it was called Brockenhurst in Hampshire. And he talked, and I don't remember anything of the words or what he was saying, but I remember that both me and my wife got quite blown out physically, and this links to what you were saying about you earlier on. We went into a kind of swoon. And we came out kind of like, as people can do with teachers. And so what's that all about? Well, that's what we've been talking about. That's this energetic transmission. And of course it shows that it's beyond words because I don't even remember what he was talking about. But something of the vibration he was emitting touched me and resonated with me and my wife. Now, I've not been someone who's been to loads of teachers and satsangs. I've done a few through my kind of researching years. But I've kind of found out by talking with people now that there's a kind of cult of satsang where people go to the teacher and hang out with him, and it's because of this transmission of energy to some extent, because it's almost like getting a hit of a drug and getting high. So, okay, is there anything wrong with that? Well, no, not ostensibly, because whatever's being awoken in someone is in them. So, that's all good, and you're kind of reaching something inside you that is there and latent in you. But the way I've understood it from seeing what's going on out there is that there can become an addiction to this high. And so people go to the guru for the high, and maybe they're kind of knocked out of their minds for a while and they feel maybe blissful or peaceful. And then they go back to their lives and it all starts again. So it's a bit like, injecting a drug and you get the relief and then it passes. So what has that got to do with this? Well, I would say very little. It's good to have an experience of your potential, of your your potential in terms of your stillness, perhaps even bliss, mindlessness, that's all good. But if it's been stimulated by an outside source that isn't, your own, there's a kind of dependency. And of course, this is what can build up between students and teachers. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that dependency has nothing, it's a kind of negative outcome that can arise between student and teacher, but it's something that has to be made aware of and stopped. And some teachers don't have a vested interest in stopping it. They want the followers and they want the attention. But I think anyone who's really trying to impart what this is about would actually try and undercut that and say, I'm not here for you to get a fix. What is the real work? The real work is getting to a point where that stillness, for example, as we're talking about, is opened up in you as part of your natural state, that you're returning to that. Not that you have to, as with the practice, keep returning to some practice or some person, some teacher in order to kickstart it. So there's a danger of an addiction to satsangs and to getting that hit from the guru. I would say it's like we've talked about openings, and that's a massive subject. And I actually said to you recently, like, openings are great for the same reason. You're seeing your potential, really. You're seeing who you really are for a short while before one loses it again. But I would say it's much more beneficial in terms of finding this, to have understandings, to actually have choices, awareness, to see, to be embroiled in the theatre of personality and the problems and the emotions and the suffering and the depressions and all that. But bring in, not that you can do it, but when choices, awareness arises within that, as you've experienced recently in our last talk, we talked about you being in a difficult period where there was a lot of anger from your shadow. So for me, choices awareness arising within that and seeing that, what's going on, and thereby it's like cauterizing it, so it's kind of sealed and it doesn't, it can't rise up again. If that awareness is there, it can see it coming. So it doesn't, it's almost like that pattern is just kind of dying. Because the more it's brought into the light, it can't exist. So what I'm trying to say is that for me, that's a much more beneficial and important thing to have than just an opening. Because you can get high on openings, they can just go, you can be right back where you began. Usually you have some memory of it and it's lovely. But the real progress happens when that choices awareness comes in. It starts seeing your personality in its operation and starts to undermine it. That's when the identification with personality is really, really being undermined. And that's the real, that's the cutting edge that gets you to the point of the shift where none of this is needed, because you are already who you are. You're in the natural state. Nothing needs to happen. You're just simply being what you are.